The legal heat on Rudy Giuliani is now scorching. Trump's lawyer reportedly in talks to be paid by Ukraine's top prosecutor as they worked to go after the Bidens. The Washington Post reporting earlier this year, Giuliani negotiating a $200,000 deal. All of this comes as Trump distanced himself from Giuliani on Ukraine, denying that he sent him over there.
What was Rudy Giuliani doing in Ukraine on your behalf?
Well, you have to ask that to Rudy, but Rudy, I don't even know. I know he was going to go to Ukraine, and I think he canceled the trip. But you know, Rudy has other clients other than me. I'm one.
So you didn't direct him to go there on your behalf.
No, but you have to understand, Rudy is a great corruption fighter. He felt personally insulted by what happened during my campaign because there were a lot of bad things happening.
Giuliani's your personal lawyer, so you didn't direct him to go to Ukraine to do anything or put any heat on him.
No, I didn't direct him, but he is a warrior. Rudy's a warrior. Rudy went. He possibly saw some. I think he's done work in Ukraine for years.
So you didn't direct him, right? But in Trump's own conversation with the Ukrainian president, he brought up Giuliani multiple times and, as everyone remembers, directed Giuliani to do the follow-up. Gordon Sondland also testified Giuliani was who he worked with at the express direction of Trump. So Trump is now saying, hey, it wasn't me. I don't know what was happening. Look at the other clients, when he already has the direct quote. Think about how this all lines up, from asking Giuliani to do this stuff to now, well, you have to ask Rudy. Sound familiar?
President, did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels? Then why did Michael Cohen make it if there was no truth or allegation?
Well, you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's my attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael.
Do you know where he got the money to make that payment?
No, I don't know.
What was Rudy Giuliani doing in Ukraine on your behalf?
Well, you have to ask that to Rudy, but Rudy, I don't even know. I know he was going to go to Ukraine, and I think he canceled the trip. But you know, Rudy has other clients other than me. I'm one.
So you didn't.
Let's get into it. Former prosecutor Seth Waxman and Bill Kristol from Defending Democracy Together. Bill, do you see any parallels here?
Yeah, obviously. Both were criminal conspiracies. Trump was at the center of both of them, and people were acting on his behalf with his knowledge and to some degree at his direction. And that's it.
As the saying goes, Seth, booyakasha, Bill Kristol identifying two conspiracies with the president as the beneficiary of both of them. As a lawyer, walk us through that. The first one was charged in court. The second one's under investigation, including by the same SDNY office.
Yeah, I mean, this one, his claim is just not credible. It's bordering on laughable. I mean, when I was a federal prosecutor, I investigated all kinds of conspiracies where the kingpin said, look, my consigliaries, my confidants, my co-conspirators, they're out there doing things. I didn't direct that. I didn't have anything to do with it. But in those cases, I didn't have a transcript on the day those crimes were committed, where just 8 hours later, the crime was committed or talked about by the lead co-conspirator. Here we have Trump on tape, on transcript, saying, you know, I need that favor. And then he says on that very transcript, directing Rudy. And he tells the president of Ukraine, he says, Rudy very much knows what's happening, and he's a very capable guy. If you could speak to him, that would be great. And those were the president's own words. The idea that he didn't direct Giuliani, that just doesn't carry any water.
Bill, what do you see as significant in the fact that the White House is moving away from perfect call and into more blatantly lying and trying to say, we didn't ask Rudy to do this, we weren't involved, well, the money wasn't held up anyway. There seems to be some awareness, even at the Trump presidential level, that the old defenses were very weak.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they're counting on Republicans at the end of the day saying, well, he did a lot of things he probably shouldn't have done, and Rudy was kind of a loose cannon. But, you know, at the end of the day, they got the aid and the no harm, no foul kind of thing. I don't think there was no harm, let me make clear. But I think that's what they're counting on. They've gotten away from defending the substance of either the actual conspiracy, the extortion conspiracy that Trump was at the center of, or the cover-up, which I think has been a little bit underreported. I mean, we wouldn't know about any of this if it weren't for the whistleblower. And we came pretty close to not knowing about the whistleblower's report. Why? Because it wasn't transmitted to the Hill the way it was supposed to be. And that seems to have been, it's clear that Trump was told about the whistleblower report. He may well have urged that it not go forward. When it finally went forward, we now know, and it was already clear, I guess, that he let the aide go, and he also had this phony conversation with Sondland where he pretends no quid pro quo, right? So the whole thing is a conspiracy and a cover-up, and I think it's pretty clear that it's both. And I think, the case has really been developed. I've got to say, the Democrats, thanks above all to the whistleblower and then the testimony of a lot of people, we know quite a lot about what's happened. And one final point, who haven't we heard from? We haven't heard from Mulvaney. We haven't heard from the lawyers in the White House. We haven't heard from Giuliani. Trump says, facts are on my side. He won't allow any of the people who are on his side, so to speak, to testify. All the civil servants, the military officers, they've all testified under oath. Where's Mulvaney? Where's Giuliani? Where's Pompeo? Where are the White House lawyers? I think that's a pretty, I don't know, I defer to Seth on this, but that would seem to be pretty damning if it were a normal trial, that all the witnesses on one side are not showing up.
Yeah, it's very damning, especially to Bill's point, Seth, when part of what you want to say is not simply, what did the president do? Does he have to defend himself? But just laying out basic facts, like why was the money frozen? And if it wasn't for what Donald Trump said on the White House lawn, which is he wanted an unconstitutional targeting of his rival potentially in the next election, if it wasn't for that reason, what was the better real reason?
Yeah, and we have an absence of that, just to Bill's point. I mean, in a courtroom, you could have something called a missing witness instruction. So the law sometimes allows for the government, for example, to say, well, look, you have a witness who's in your particular control. In this case, Trump with Secretary Pompeo and the others. And if the defense doesn't produce that person, there can be a missing witness instruction where the jury is told you can infer the negative from their absence. This is different. It's impeachment. But the law is aware of this kind of tactic, and prosecutors can go after it. And their absence is a glaring hole in defense in Trump's commentary.
And Bill, I want to also just flag this bizarre back and forth with the president and his lawyer about whether or not there's an insurance policy, whether they're publicly blackmailing each other or not. It's 2019, so I guess I should get to that. This is reading from some of the reporting. His lawyer saying Rudy Giuliani's call to Trump. In a new call, he emphasized he was not serious when he publicly said he had an insurance policy if thrown under the bus by the president, adding, quote, he shouldn't joke. He's not a funny guy. 10,000 comedians are out of work and you make a joke. It doesn't work that way. Bill, do you want to say anything about that?
Didn't Rudy's lawyer say that Rudy talked to the president, was it today or yesterday or something? To try to
say he called.
So the conspiracy is continuing. I mean, that's what's sort of amazing. It's all in public, and the conspiracy doesn't stop. Most conspiracies, once they're discovered, they kind of go underground or something. But it's all continuing to this day. Mulvaney, Trump, Giuliani, they're all talking to each other.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot. Bill Kristol, Seth Waxman, I wish you both a very happy Thanksgiving. And Bill, I hope your Thanksgiving is full of the rule of law that I know you're so passionate about.
Well, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.